All right, today we're going to dive into a document that goes head-to-head with some of the most common and long-standing criticisms against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And look, our goal here isn't to take a side, but simply to explain the arguments that the source itself makes in its own defense.
So, this is the very first line from the document we're looking at, and wow, it really sets the tone, doesn't it? Right off the bat, it's framing this whole thing not as some new debate, but as a conflict that's been going on for, well, almost 200 years.
So, you gotta ask, where does all this hostility come from? Well, according to this source, it's not some new thing. They argue it's part of a historical pattern that, they claim, goes all the way back to the very beginnings of Christianity itself. And this is where the document makes a really interesting comparison. It's essentially drawing a straight line from ancient history to today. On one side, you have the Pharisees and Sadducees, who the source says were hostile to Jesus because he was a threat to their power. Then, on the other side, the source claims that the exact same pattern is happening right now, that some modern critics oppose the church for a similar reason: fear of losing their own influence or income. Okay, so we've talked about the history of the opposition. Now the document pivots to tackle the substance of it, what it calls the common tropes that you hear all the time.
And the first one they tackle is a real heavy hitter, one you've probably heard before. It's this idea that the church has amassed so much wealth that it must be some kind of corrupt, secretive financial empire.
So you can see the two sides of the coin here. The trope paints this wealth as proof of greed, but the rebuttal from the source flips that narrative on its head. It argues that, no, these assets are legally managed to fund a massive global operation, everything from humanitarian aid and universities to thousands of buildings all over the world. The point, they say, isn't personal enrichment, it's long-term stability.
All right, next up is a big theological one. This is the accusation that, the beliefs of Latter-day Saints are so far from mainstream Christianity that they don't even count as Christian.
So how does the source push back on this? Well, first they point right to the official name of the church. Jesus Christ is right there in the name. They state that belief in his divinity, his atonement, and his resurrection is the absolute center of their faith. The point they're making is that while other folks can debate the definitions, from their perspective, they are absolutely unequivocally Christian.
And that brings us to maybe the most famous and definitely the most misunderstood trope of them all, an image that's really stuck in the public imagination for more than a century.
So, the common idea, the trope, is that this is still a widespread practice. But the source document is, well, it's extremely clear on this point. It states that the mainstream church officially ended plural marriage way back in 1890. And today, any member who tries it is excommunicated. The document clarifies that the practice only exists in small, fundamentalist splinter groups that have no connection to the mainstream church.
Okay, so after laying out these rebuttals one by one, the document asks a really important question. If these tropes are false, why on earth have they stuck around for so long? Why do they keep popping up decade after decade? And that question leads us right into the next section, where the source tries to pinpoint who's behind these tropes and, maybe more importantly, why.
So this is how the source breaks it down. Back in the 19th century, they argue, the opposition was led mainly by ministers who were worried about losing members from their own churches. Fast forward to today, and the argument is that the hostility often comes from secular critics who view the church's cultural influence as a threat. But in both cases, the source suggests many people just end up repeating the accusations without ever really looking into them.
Okay, and this is where everything comes together in what is, honestly, the most provocative argument in the entire document. It takes this whole idea of opposition and just turns it completely on its head, arguing that it's not a sign of weakness, but proof of the church's divine mission.
And to build this case, the document goes all the way back to that first trope about money, but it comes at it from a totally different angle with something it calls the temple argument.
The logic here is pretty straightforward. Think about it. Temples cost a fortune to build, with the best materials, but they don't make any money at all. They have no commercial use, and you can't really sell them. By any normal business standard, they are just a terrible financial investment.
Which brings up a really powerful question. If the main goal was just to get rich, does it make any sense to sink billions and billions of dollars into buildings that will never ever provide a financial return?
The answer, according to the source, is simple. The investment isn't about money, it's spiritual. These buildings, they argue, are monuments to God, not to greed. And in a way, their very existence undercuts the whole corrupt financial empire idea. And this is where the source ties everything together.
The big ultimate thesis is this: all this hostility, all this opposition, it wasn't a surprise, it was foretold. And because of that, it actually serves as a strange kind of confirmation of the Church's divine claims.
And to support this incredible claim, the document points right to the New Testament, where Jesus tells his followers that being falsely persecuted isn't a curse, it's actually a blessing, and a sign that you're on the same path as the prophets who came before you.
The document then brings it home with this final, haunting quote from the Church's founder, Joseph Smith, reportedly said right before he was killed by a mob. It's presented as the ultimate example of this pattern of persecution, an innocent leader murdered for what he believed.
And so, all of this leaves us with a central question that the source material wants you to wrestle with. Does opposition validate a belief? Is facing constant criticism a sign that something is wrong? Or could it, as this document argues, actually be a sign that it's true?